Greetings, family. Welcome to the African Exodus show. I'm your host, Tierney Cherie, coming to you with a new video. Before we get started, I want to remind you, if you have not and you want to receive notifications anytime that I put up a video, you can go to my Telegram channel. The link to that is down in the description. Anytime, even if you want to message me, that's the best place to go because I check Telegram more often than I check emails and things like that. So if you want to be a part of that channel and that group, you can go and click that link down below in the description. But with that, let's get started with African and world news. Ethiopia is a BRICS member, as well as a number of other countries, including Egypt, Iran, Saudi Arabia. So things are definitely heating up on that front and that economic front. And also things are heating up as far as the international relations that go on between a country like Ethiopia and the United States. So let's go to this story. It says Ethiopian Prime Minister hails BRIC membership. Ethiopia's admission to the BRICS, a bloc of emerging countries that until now has only included Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is a high point for Africa's second most populous country, rejoiced its Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed on Thursday. Meeting at the summit in Johannesburg, the BRICS, which aim to increase their influence in the world, announced on Thursday that they would welcome 6 new members in January. So let's just talk a little bit about these members before we go on talking about Ethiopia. So they invited Iran, Argentina, Egypt, Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates. So I know Iran, Argentina, I believe everyone essentially over Ethiopia has more economic power. So the fact that Ethiopia was let in, a lot of people were speculating whether or not Ethiopia would be let in. But I think the reason why these countries were chosen is because if you look at what's happening as far as sanctions and how the West literally froze Russia out of their own economy, that's trying to be prevented from happening again. And that's really what they're trying to do with this BRICS conglomerate. They're trying to make themselves foolproof, like not dependent on the US dollar, not dependent on US trade deals, not dependent on the West at all. And if you think about a country like Iran and think about a country like Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, you think about these countries that are susceptible to a potential future sanction by Western powers. In fact, Iran is currently being sanctioned by the West, obviously, in many ways. That's a way to really prevent that from happening again, as far as what's been happening historically whenever the West does not approve of a certain country or the actions that they're taking. And I also want to note specifically Egypt. That's a really interesting one because if you don't know, that kind of shows you right there, Egypt and Ethiopia, they have a tiff, a real tiff that some people have even speculated could lead to a war over the fact that Ethiopia is going forward with building this dam. And the fact that Egypt is also part of this should let you know this is not necessarily a friendship alliance. This is not necessarily parties who are going to come together and forget all their differences. It's really a way, though, to bring economic leverage to countries that historically have been frozen out of international conglomerates like this, so such as like the G7, for example. So let's go on. It says, an important moment for Ethiopia. The BRICS leaders accepted our entry into the group today. Ethiopia stands ready to cooperate with all for an inclusive and prosperous world order. Congratulations to all Ethiopians, also read on X account of the Ethiopian Prime Minister. Now, traditionally non-aligned, Ethiopia maintains close ties with Russia and China, its main trading partners, but also with the United States. Even if relations with Washington became strained during the 2-year conflict in the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia, which ended in November 2022. And that's the question that's really the answer to the question. If you're wondering why now, as far as Ethiopia pushing forward with such a bold move, I think the war in Tigray really changed things because, again, you saw that the international community ganged up on Ethiopia and Eritrea, particularly those countries that are Western leaning, really ganged up on this country. And they saw the economic ramifications of the US dollar being weaponized against you. So it ends off with saying Ethiopia was one of the world's most dynamic economies during the 2010 decade, but its growth has curbed by the the COVID-19 pandemic, climatic calamities, the conflict in the Tigray, and the global shockwave of the war in Ukraine. And let's be clear, the entire world has suffered from these same exact things. Ethiopia is not different in that regard. So here's some takeaways that I think you should have. First of all, this is not necessarily going to protect Ethiopia from the ramifications that come with Western dominance, because there is still Western dominance. But this is a way to planning for a backdoor, meaning the US dollar, if you were watching some of the news coverage from the BRICS meeting that happened, the US dollar is being declared basically to be on its last leg, and people are being urged to turn away from the US dollar. And that's not something that's happening all at once, but it's happening gradually. You're seeing more countries vocally express opposition to continuing under that hegemonic rule. And now you're seeing more formal actions being taken, such as this by Ethiopia. It's not a military alliance, though. That's something that you should understand. This is not something like NATO. Some people have it in their head that this is going to combat NATO. Again, understand, NATO is a military alliance. So if you attack one NATO country, all of the NATO countries have to jump in. This is not that type of situation. This is about, as the article said, about economies and about influence. Now, it could turn into a military type situation, particularly if there is war with China. I could see there being some type of Axis type formation that was going to try to combat NATO. But as of right now, this is only a economic move by the Ethiopian government. The other thing, again, to emphasize that Egypt, one of Ethiopia's, I would say, enemies in the current state of things, is also a part of this. So this is not a way to basically rid the world of different types of issues between countries. In fact, there are other countries that are enemies that are also a part of BRICS. So if you know, for example, India and China do not get along, yet obviously they are the forming members of BRICS, the founding members of BRICS, and yet they don't get along at all. So that's another thing to keep in mind. I want to emphasize, though, this is not a way for us to forget about our problems and throw all of our ducks on BRICS, basically accepting more African issues. This is not an end-all, be-all. I do think it was a smart move by Ethiopia, though, given the fact that we're seeing another possible war unraveling inside of the northern Ethiopia area, the Amhara area of Ethiopia. So we're seeing another possible war happening. We don't know, at least I don't know, whether or not it's being stoked by the Western tensions, such as the Tigray war was. We don't know that yet, but that could be another situation where you have the international community trying to freeze out Ethiopia, and I think they were very intelligent to get them a backup plan. That's the way I look at this. Now, we're going to talk about a similar story, though, because as we said, Saudi Arabia also just joined BRICS, and there's a recent development as far as the relations between Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia. Saudi border guards killed hundreds of Ethiopian migrants. That's according to Human Rights Watch. So let's just put a little footnote inside of there. Human Rights Watch is a part of the international world order. They are working for Western powers. They are oftentimes the ones who are used to point out so-called human rights atrocities that are happening. And I only put that in there to say that, in my opinion, they know of a lot more that happens around the world. Let's be very clear. Human rights violations are rampant. Every single country, every single state, every single community. There are things that you could categorize as the government inflicting human rights atrocities on people. But Human Rights Watch, whenever they decide to flash their flashlight on certain powers, I think that it has more to do with a political maneuvering that's trying to be done in order to bolster the international world order, essentially. So the fact that they are reporting this, it doesn't mean it's not true. Absolutely, much of what they report is true, but the timing of it is what you have to question. But let's see what's being reported. So it's being reported that the Saudi Arabian border guards have killed hundreds of Ethiopian migrants, including women, children, who attempted to enter the kingdom along its mountainous border. Human Rights Watch said attacks against groups of migrants who used remote mountain tracks to cross into Saudi Arabia by foot were widespread and systematic, and that the killings are continuing. A Saudi official who did not provide their name said on Monday in an emailed response to questions to the government's media office that the Human Rights Watch's allegations were unfounded and not based on reliable sources. Saudi authorities have also strongly denied allegations made by the UN officials in 2022 that border guards systematically killed migrants last year. Now, the Ethiopian government and Addis Ababa and officials in Yemen did not respond for requests. A State Department spokesperson, and this is why I said, interesting, the timing. A State Department spokesperson said the U.S. has raised concerns about the allegations in the report, with the Saudi government had urged it to undertake a thorough and transparent investigation. Always, whenever you used to read U.S. Department or blah blah is in the mix, always look at it as a reason to start being skeptical, because the United States government also oversees the military gear being used for many human rights violations. The one that, probably the biggest example we could think of is a country like Israel. And so many things are being done to kill Palestinians. And yet the State Department doesn't see that happening. Rarely do they comment. And yet they choose sometimes when they want to comment, sometimes when they don't want to, depending on who they're looking at as an ally and who they're looking at as a foe. So if you know anything about Ethiopia and Saudi Arabia, obviously Ethiopia recently ended their Tigray conflict. Although the United States was involved in negotiations to end the conflict, Ethiopia still has not restored relations with the aid organizations. So if you don't know, during that war, Ethiopia expelled these U.S. aid organizations because, if you don't know, they are vehicles for regime change. So they were expelled from Ethiopia. So with that, they have not restored those relations. In fact, they're trying to get them to start allowing the aid institutions back into Ethiopia. And Ethiopia has not budged on that point. On top of that, they just joined BRICS. On top of that, on the Saudi side, not only have they just joined BRICS, but Saudi Arabia and the U.S. are having a very bad relationship right now because of the fact that Saudi has, irregardless of what the United States has pushed for, has not tried to increase the oil output for the West, for the United States. And so there's a lot of reasons to put stories out there that might be true. Frankly, when I first seen the article, I'm like, of course, because we don't know, Arabs historically, presently, have a real deeply racist entrenched animosity towards Africans. So the idea of the Saudi government shooting at Ethiopians did not surprise me. And I do believe it, honestly. I believe this is probably a true report, especially because even in the same article, they start interviewing people who have been victims of it. But again, the timing, that's the thing you have to understand. They're very calculated on when they're going to talk about things and when they're not going to talk about things. So it said a U.S. State Department official said, again, they raised concerns about the allegations. Now, there are an estimated 750,000 Ethiopians in Saudi Arabia, according to the UN, and many have fled economic hardship in Ethiopia, which has also seen its northern province of Tigray riven by brutal conflict in recent years. The migration route from the Horn of Africa across the Gulf of Aden through Yemen and to Saudi Arabia, one of the richest countries in the Arab world, is a well-established corridor for Ethiopian migrants. The Human Rights Watch said it based its reports. Now, this is the other thing that was kind of strange. It based its reports on witness testimony as well as 350 videos and photos of wounded and killed migrants and satellite imagery showing the location of Saudi Arabian guard posts. So that's the other thing I was kind of curious to me, as far as how did you have access to satellite imagery of Saudi Arabian guard posts. The advocacy group said, however, its researchers were unable to access the stretch of the Yemen-Saudi border where the alleged killing took place. Many people told me that they witnessed killing killing fields, bodies scattered all over the mountains, people blown in half, said Nadia Hardman, the report's author, said in an interview with Reuters. So this sounds like it's not confirmed even by Human Rights Watch. Again, it sounds like they're saying someone told me this, and also they said satellite images, but they said they were not able to actually access that part of the border to confirm and verify that these reports were true. So like I said, this could be true. I would not be surprised if it was, because again, we know the Arab world has a lot of hostility towards Africans, but I also would not be surprised if some of this was being drummed up by the West. I would not be surprised if this was a way to try to fracture relations with two new BRICS members. I would not be surprised if this was a way to try to incite animosity. So I wouldn't be surprised either way. But I think it's important to know that this is something that's been reported over time. It's something that could definitely be happening rampantly or not rampantly, regardless of how it's happening. If the Saudi guards are really shooting at migrants who are children, women and children and men for trying to look for a better life, we should definitely condemn them and any type of brutality against Africans in the name of our own dignity. So with that, let's go to the next story. So I was hoping that we would have the results already, but we do not. Zimbabwe is right now in the midst of another election. I'm sure by next week we can actually report on the results. But as of right now, the counting is still happening. But there have been some arrests made. So I want you to understand some of the politics that go on anytime Zimbabwe has an election. Zimbabwe arrests 41 poll monitors and accuses them of trying to rig vote counts for opposition. Zimbabwe's police said that they arrested 41 workers for poll monitoring groups and seized the computers and other equipment they were using to tabulate the results of vote counting. Those arrested were working with two accredited monitoring organizations. Okay, so listen, Zimbabwe Election Support Network and Election Resource Center, which deploys 7,500 observers nationwide. Police spokesperson Paul Nyanthi accused them of being involved in subversive and criminal activities as part of an opposition plan to fabricate the results. These figures were being supplied by some observers and political party agents, is what said. The arrests made during raids on various locations, including a hotel, were criticized by Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, which said that their workers were carrying out their mandate as accredited election observers. Zimbabwe's long history of disputed elections has left many wary of official results. Nearly half of the respondents in a pre-election survey of Afrobarometer, a prominent research organization, said they feared that the announced results would not reflect counted results. President Emerson Mnangagwa, who is 80 years old and who seeks a second term, which is so crazy. I thought he was in his second term. It's funny how it seemed like he's been here forever now. Well, he used his presidential powers to extend balloting to Thursday night at a dozen polling stations after voting was delayed by up to 10 hours in many areas. His main challenger, Nelson Chamisa, a 45-year-old lawyer who narrowly lost the disputed election in 2018, described the voting as a sham, saying the delays were aimed at enfranchising votes in his urban strongholds. Some things that you should understand about Zimbabwe. If you don't know about the land reform issue in Zimbabwe, you can't really speak on Zimbabwe, and I'm sure hopefully most of you know about that. Zimbabwe, one of the few countries, only country in Africa probably, right, that actually took back the land from the colonists, that actually seized land from white farmers who were dominating the landscape inside of Zimbabwe, to where you had Africans who were indigenous who didn't even have a piece of land. So they took the land from the white farmers and redistributed it to the black farmers. Now that, of course, caused a whole barrage of issues, particularly coming from the West. You know, there's things that you can say could have been done differently as by Zimbabwe, but understand the vast majority of the harm that became afflicted on Zimbabwe was from the West, because they said, oh, heck no, you cannot take land back from us. Once we take it, we keep it. We don't care. Certainly, we don't live by their rules if it was us to take something from them. But when they take something from us, they feel like they have a right forever. That's why South Africa, despite the fact that the white minority is less than 10% of the population, they still control over 80% of the land. So they wanted to continue that in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe wasn't having it. And now here we are today. Zimbabwe has been sanctioned consistently because they have gone against the rules of the rule-based world order. That is to capitulate to the demands of the white oppressor. They did not want to do that. So they're being sanctioned and sanctioned and sanctioned. And here we are right now. We have a situation where ZANU-PF, the ruling party, is being challenged by Nelson Chamisa. So Nelson Chamisa is seeming like a Bobby Wine type figure, someone who is being held up in the media, someone who's being celebrated for his youth, his vigor, and all his vision for Zimbabwe. Understand, though, it's been charged of him that he has affiliations with Western organizations, Western powers, and that they want him to be the president of Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe has been insisting that their goal is to ensure a fair election and not allow the West to come in and manipulate results. So when you hear about organizations, you can look at their names and kind of tell where they're leaning. The Zimbabwe Election Support Network, Election Resource Center, and of course, Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights. These are non-GMOs, NGOs that are planted inside of our countries, amongst our people, in order to regulate results to achieve a certain result. And so I do believe, Zimbabwe, when they say that they're doing these arrests to basically ensure that these more than likely international organizations do not thwart the process. But the news will take the other view, that is that the Zimbabwe government is refusing to allow a fair election. Realistically, none of us are on the ground. None of us are counting votes. So we can't say that we know one thing for sure. But what I can say is that I do not believe that the powers that be are trying to see a continuation of ZANU-PF as the ruling power of Zimbabwe. So that's something for you to keep in mind. Let's go to the next story. So ECOWAS is again facing another situation, another coup, but not only that, another long transition plan that's been put forward by the coup leaders. So it says, ECOWAS slams the unacceptable Niger transition plan. The West African bloc, ECOWAS, rejected the proposal by Niger's mutinous soldiers for a 3-year transition to democratic rule. Speaking to Al Jazeera earlier this week, the bloc's commissioner for peace and security said it was unacceptable. The door for diplomacy with Niger's junta remained open, but the bloc is not going to engage in drawn-out talks that lead nowhere. Abdel Fattah Musa, the ECOWAS commissioner for peace and security, told the Associated Press. It is the belief among the ECOWAS heads of state and also the commission that the coup in Niger is one coup too many for the region. And if we allow it, then we are going to have a domino effect in the region, and we are determined to stop it. And I'll give you a translation of that. If we allow another coup to happen in West Africa, we'll probably be next. I mean, it could be a Nigeria coup next. It could be a Ghana coup next. It could be any of us next. We can't allow another one. We can try to get through with one, maybe two, but having 4 coups that are successfully able to undo the power structure inside of our regions where we're still trying to rule, that is not something that we can tolerate. Now, they said while direct talks and back-channel negotiations are ongoing, he said the door for diplomacy wasn't open indefinitely. We're not going to engage in long, drawn-out haggling with these military officers. We went down that route in Mali and Burkina Faso and elsewhere, that's Guinea, and we are getting nowhere, they said. Now, this is an important context. It says ECOWAS has used Niger as the red line against further coups after several in the region, including Mali and Burkina Faso, and that was since 2020. So this is their red line. They can't allow Niger, they said, to continue on without restoring democratic order. Because if they were to do so, then that would basically be allowing for a situation where these countries themselves would face a possible coup in the future. So here's the thing that you should take away from the ECOWAS. It looks like it's not going to be an instantaneous thing like we thought. Some of us thought that there was an imminent invasion of Niger. Now, understand that sometimes things can take longer depending on the bureaucracy. My understanding is Nigeria is one of the biggest hiccups inside of this relationship as far as trying to have a formal invasion. But it looks like it's going to take longer for it to move in one direction or the other. The thing that you should understand is that it is going to be a war. It's being propagated inside of news and media. It's being spoken about behind the scenes. And when you have a country that has such an important their resources are of such importance to the imperialists, then the war is coming. And it's only a matter of what's going to tip it over. I think that something else is going to happen soon because I believe, as you know, if you watch this channel, that this war is something that is desired by the Western powers to reassert dominance inside of the region. So I think there's something else is going to have to happen, maybe to tip it over, because maybe the African leaders are taking too long in order to enact the plans that have been put forth by the West. But certainly another 3-year transition is kind of hilarious if you know what was been happening inside of Mali and Burkina Faso, to where they would say, okay, we're going to have an election next year, and then next year what happened? They're like, oh, okay, we're going to have an election in 2 more years. 2 more years go by. Oh, we'll have an election in 4 years. So if you see it like that, clearly they're calling the ECOWAS bluff, because regardless of what they say, they're not this all-powerful arm that can put their hands or their fists down and command the people in Mali to necessarily do, or the junta in Mali to do what they want. But I think that there's definitely a potential for an invasion within the near future, depending on what happens in the next few months. So with that, let's go to the next story. And this is very much related to what's happening with ECOWAS, because if you don't know, the people who are being put up to be the possible one who's stoking these coups, the ones who are trying to control Africa, is I call them Wagner, but someone corrected me and said it's Wagner whenever you have a W in Russian. So thank you for letting me know that. But the Wagner group, the group of mercenaries, they're the ones who, it has been said, are possibly causing these coups, or they're trying to assert dominance in Africa. So if you did not hear, Prigozhin, that is the chief of Wagner, he is now deceased and confirmed deceased. Vladimir Putin has now confirmed the death of Prigozhin. One, obviously, that was probably assassination, but we don't have other facts yet. Now, with this death, though, it's been question what's going to happen with the Wagner group inside of Africa. Are they going to continue operations? More than likely, I don't think that Putin intends for them to go away, but wants to restructure that group. But just to read from this article, Yevgeny Prigozhin will be remembered in various countries and for different reasons. In Kiev, for leading his fighters into some of the fiercest battles against Ukraine, in Russia as a patriot, and as a traitor for his short-lived uprising in June. Prigozhin will also be remembered in countries far away from Russia, like the Central African Republic and Mali, where governments are relying on the services of his Wagner group to counter security threats. Increasingly, public opinion in these countries view Wagner and the Russian government as indispensable partners, helping their countries regain their sovereignty from France. In Mali, the ruling military ran to Moscow for solutions to stop a militant insurgency, but also to get rid of French forces. In response, Russia gave Wagner the green light to deploy. So just in case you were confused, Russia does exercise a degree of control over Wagner. They're not acting out independently. Now, it didn't take long before neighboring Burkina Faso itself, wrecked by Islamist militancy and instability, caused an army takeover, looked east for respite. In Africa, Wagner advances Moscow's military, political, and economic goals, much to the chagrin of Western leaders who bemoan the loss of spheres of influence. In Niger, the latest Sahel country to succumb to a coup d'etat, pro-junta rallies have called for Russian intervention and unexpectedly the departure of French forces. Questions about the future of Wagner's operations in Africa have been around since Prigozhin's mutiny in June. Then Russia's Foreign Affairs Ministry said the events would have no bearing on the group's work. While Prigozhin's death is undoubtedly a bigger tragedy, Wagner has become too important a foreign policy tool for Moscow to let go. So again, I believe there's going to be a restructuring of Wagner. I don't believe they're going to go away. And therefore, there's going to continue to be a media campaign by the West in order to demonize that relationship with the African continent, because as I told you, they want this war to happen inside of the African continent. They want to reassert their dominance from China. And I don't believe it will happen, but I believe, unfortunately, there's bloodshed that has to be done for the West and before they're willing to accept the fact that they have lost their control over their world order that they used to enjoy. So with that, I am done. I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you all for watching. I will see you all in the next video.
Revolting again. The power structure. The American power structure? No. The French power structure? No. The English power structure? No. Then what power structure? An international Western power structure.
You know, my mother had an expression, out of everything terrible, something good will come if you look hard enough for it. I think this presents us with some significant opportunities to make some real changes. You know, we are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people dying, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there. There's going to be a new world order out there. And we've got to lead it. And we've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it. So anyway, I'm going to hush up, Mary, fire away.
The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that our old systems are not fit anymore for the 21st century. It has laid bare the fundamental lack of social cohesion, fairness, inclusion, and equality. In short, we need a great reset.
This is an historic moment. We have in this past year made great progress in ending the long era of conflict and Cold War. We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
The U.S. presidential motorcade arrives at the United Nations, passing the ever-present groups of demonstrators assembled on the other side of the road. A sense of anticipation in the General Assembly chamber, and a warm reception for Barack Obama as he walks to the podium, his wife seated among the heads of state and dignitaries.
The time has come for the world to move in a new direction. We must embrace a new era of engagement based on mutual interest and mutual respect, and our work must begin now.
And the president outlined his vision of a new world order in which the US would participate fully, one rooted on 4 basic principles.
Non-proliferation and disarmament, the promotion of peace and security, the preservation of our planet, and a global economy that advances opportunity for all people.
Among the speakers that followed the US president, the leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, speaking at the UN for the first time after 40 years in power. And waiving the UN Charter, he called for an end to any permanent membership of the Security Council, arguing that small nations should have the same rights as the big. It was a speech that lasted well over an hour and covered subjects ranging from jet lag to political assassinations.
And then the assassination or the killing of Kennedy in 63 or 62, the President of the United States of America. Why? We want to know who killed him. Somebody who, by the name of Lee Harvey, and then another Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey. Why did he kill him?
Earlier, the UN Secretary General had opened proceedings, sticking to his allotted time, calling for international unity.
If ever there were a time to act in a spirit of renewed multilateralism, a moment to create a United Nations of genuine collective action, it is now. Now is our time, a time to put the united back into the United Nations, united in purpose, united in action.
And a reminder that this UN building is due to be closed for renovation at the end of these proceedings.
Our common ambition is to make this outward renovation the symbol of inward renewal.
A renewal, importantly, in which the United States says it is willing to both lead and be part of.